All right. Well, today is January 31st, 2020, and we have my buddy Jarrod Walczer here joining us today.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. This is
anytime.
Another episode of the FCMG Podcast. Thank you for watching, and let's check out our list here. So, as always, we're going to start with your kind of like the roots of your creativity. And we were talking about before the episode that a lot of that came from learning to communicate with your younger brother.
That's right. Yeah. So I have a younger brother. His name is Zachary. Zachary and I are 3.5 years apart. And Zachary has, he was diagnosed at a very early age, about 2, with the as being on the autism spectrum. Okay. And my brother's a wonderful person. It's I'm struggling to search for the words to describe just how much I feel that I owe him in all of the ways that he has likely changed who I will be.
Yeah.
And so look, in thinking about my creativity, my brother has a very idiosyncratic way of communicating. Some of your viewers may have seen that there was a documentary a few years ago about a father who related to his son through Disney movies and their songs and lyrics and the quotes. And my brother's very much a parallel of that.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. So it's not exclusive to the Disney brand, but also Disney brand. If you need to redo the documentary, we can talk about that. But
if you need a part 2,
that's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so from a very early age, Zachary, he struggled to communicate because of his special needs. But we found that we were able to get him to engage by using vocal cues and tics and lines from scripts of things that he would have seen. So there was a long period of time where we would use the voices from Shrek to be able to communicate different needs that he had.
Donkey! Sorry, it's such a great movie.
Can I stay with you? What? Can I stay with you, please? Of course. Really? No.
You've gotten great at the impressions over years. I guess that's part of it too. Like, so you would relate to your brother through this like sort of like the script of these movies.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, look, I come from a family of theater people, and we all do voices, yes. But at the same time, that was my brother's way of being able to communicate emotions that weren't necessarily easy for him to verbalize with the same sophistication that somebody his age would be able to do. So I was saying to you earlier that for a very long time, anytime he would get angry, he would quote one of the characters from the Transformers Beast Wars series, and he would go, Megatron, terrorize! And I would know that was his moment where he was saying, wow, I'm really frustrated about whatever it was that was happening in the context. So then knowing that to calm him down, you have to become Optimus Prime. Sam, push the cube into my chest. Understanding that he related to me as his brother and to his world and the world around him through the entertainment that he was seeing, inspired a lot of what I did look through school all the way up until now. There's a lot that we can probably unpack there. It depends on how deep you want to go, but suffice it to say, my brother's disabilities, if you want to call them that, are actually really big abilities and gifts, and they have allowed me to be able to help him to do some really wonderful things for his own life, and then in turn have really inspired me to be the person that I am, not just creatively or professionally, but also just day to day doing your thing.
Yeah, that's sort of like integrity that you have.
Oh, I don't know if I have integrity, but I'd like to think so.
Oh, I mean, I could tell you that. He's all right. So through these film scripts, you made a point when we were talking earlier where it was you used play to communicate with each other, and that was a big form of play, was going through these film scripts and like doing, you mentioned the entire producer's script.
Yeah, so the nice thing about my brother is that where his interests have kind of stayed that of a child, and largely his content choices are those of, let's say, between a preschool age child, so reruns of things like I said earlier, Sharon, Lois, and Bram, or new episodes of the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, all the way up to things like Transformers cartoons or the things you would see on Cartoon Network. The only exception to the rule is that my brother, because of the family that we grew up in, also really loves musicals. It was one of the things that we found really early on, that when we would drive around to our various extracurricular activities. We're one of 4 children, so we were perpetually in one of the cars driving, blasting the Disney music. Zachary, of course, knows all of the lyrics and the words, but at a certain point, my parents were like, man, I can't do any more A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes. So they put in what they like, and we found that Zachary was able to listen to entire, not only film scores, but musical scores, and remember the full parts and break down the harmonies, and be able to take something like, for the longest time, we had a double disc set of Les Miserables, and we would be able to put on
the
one,
anniversary edition.
Yeah.
Oh God, Alfie Boe. Yeah. Oh, I love it.
Oh, but this was even before Alfie Boe. This was like Colm Wilkinson's.
Oh yeah. Okay, that's right. That's right.
So it would have been like the first anniversary edition, like maybe the 5 or 10, because Alfie Boe was what, the 20 or 30?
Yeah, I think he was the 20. Okay. And I remember for Alfie Boe's, Colm Wilkinson came back and they all did
played the bishop, and they did that quartet at the end. Oh, it's gorgeous, right?
That's if you want to see me cry, you just take me to that show. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No, I'm with you. And so, we got to a point where Zachary would change his voices and be able to sing, all of Fontaine's music, and then skip without a heartbeat to be Monsieur Thénardier and to be a dirty old man.
Yeah.
And perhaps even more impressively, when you get to those big choral numbers where everyone is singing their own little bit part, he would be able to, it was effectively like code switching through One Day More, where you start out like Colm Wilkinson, and then you get very stiff like Javert, and then, oh, I'm so sweet, and oh, Cosette, and oh, well, I'm Marius, and back and forth, understanding not only the character development, but the music as well. And so, of course, we found that out. My parents are theater heads. And so for the longest time, that was part of the way that we, I guess, communed as a family, was through that music. And then he would play, especially for things that he found funny. So we spent... goodness, it was like 2 summers in a row where we had the producer's soundtrack in the car, and we would play through the music, and again, he would sing the different parts, but then in between, he would almost want me to pause the CD so that we could do the script in between. And there was a whole summer where we did the initial scene where Nathan Lane takes away Matthew Broderick's blanket. Yeah. And he would be willing to act this out every day, a kind of me and him switching parts, to the point where he would actually run over to our sink and grab a cup of water and splash it in my face. Or he would, very lightly slap me across the face like it happens in the movie, so that I would go, I'm in pain, and I'm wet. And I still want my blue blanket. Give it to me. And so, understanding that was part of his play, and that he understood a fairly sophisticated form of adult humor in his own way, is also something that I found really creatively inspiring, that for someone with special needs, for someone who doesn't understand all of the, lewd sexual innuendos or those jokes, but that he could go and see a stage production of the producers and realize that the woman who was playing Ulo was shaking her chest, and he would go, that's silly, people are laughing. He doesn't understand why they're laughing, but he knows that it's supposed to be funny. And so he said, she shakes her chest like this. That's funny.
And you mentioned that your brother also has like, when it comes to musical ability, he has, was it perfect pitch?
Pretty much, yeah. So we come from a family of, I think, decent amateur musicians, but none of us read music. Okay, like I can fudge through music and sight read, but you'll ask our former music teacher, Mrs. Lundberg, if I can sight read. No, not really. I squeaked through to get into district and regional choir because I had a nice voice, not because I knew what I was doing. But my brother can hear a piece of music and hear it once and remember it full score, measure for measure, beat for beat in the original key.
Oh, wow.
Which is, it's phenomenal. So we will start out playing a popular song,
Yeah.
something from the radio that I may not listen to, and he'll be able to give me back most of the words and all of the music in perfect key. And if I try and then replicate that by pulling out ultimateguitar.com and plugging in whatever the first tab is, he'll go, Brony, no, that's not right. It's E flat, begin again. And so I'll be like, well, E flat, you're going to make me play a whole bunch of barred chords, and then the diminished are really difficult to play. It's okay. It's an E flat. Begin. And so, to have him experience music in that way, and to be I guess so much of a hard ass about what he wants his memory and his experience with that piece of music to be.
Yeah, he's so particular in that way.
Yeah, you do not deviate, you do not modulate. So if you can't hit those notes, you better be, squeezing your legs together real tight, or really getting low and grumbly, because, whether it's being what were we singing yesterday? We were singing "Hopelessly Devoted to You" by Olivia Newton-John from Greece, and my brother has a very deep voice, but he will always go, "Hopelessly devoted." I can't hit those notes, but he will force himself to squeak those out, because that is the original key. That is what he heard. And then later in the day, we put on a piece of music. We put on, what was his name? Thurl Ravenscott doing the original You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch. So, You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch. Right.
Yeah.
So if you're not doing that high of Olivia Newton-John and that low of Thurl Ravenscott, it's like, sorry, I'm over it.
Like you're cut.
Yeah. And Zachary, at a certain point, if I'm not playing fast enough and modulated in the right key, he'll just go off and do it on his own. And that's the great part. With no accompaniment, he'll be able to sing an entire score, and what's maybe even freakier is that you can actually hear in a full orchestra. You'll be able to say, "Oh, Zachary, what's the French horn doing in this piece of music?" You're gonna go,
"Oh my gosh!"
And
you can pick out the individual lines of each instrument.
Yeah, what's going to happen to the strings? No, 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 no.
Yeah,
and he will absolutely mimic how Stokowski played the orchestra while giving you the individual instruments.
Yeah.
There's a certain amount of creative potential there that comes with his fixations as part of his special needs.
Yeah.
That it's been awe-inspiring. It has been a serious exercise in memory games.
Yeah, and that's got to be great training for you. Like when it comes to creativity and like music and singing and stuff like that.
Oh, well, it makes that I knew my script really early when we were in drama club.
Oh, that's why you were so good at this. Yeah. You had a secret weapon.
Yeah, listen, I had a permanent practice partner whether I wanted one or not.
Yeah, you're the best vocal coach out there.
Well, I didn't not. Yeah, he was really great. And the lovely part is that now, look, I've been out of high school for, it's been 10 years.
Yeah.
So I've been out for 10 years, and he can still remember back to productions and will say, "And the Freddie Award goes to," he'll always name me, although I didn't win one. But he'll be able to remember that, there was a tap dance solo before a certain song, before a certain number, and he'll remember, who played what in the high school play. And these might have been people that he met in passing once.
Yeah.
So it's really special that then you can take something that has multiple art forms, which like the producers, where there was a film, then there's a musical film, then there's a staged adaptation that my dad was in a production of The Producers at Munopco a couple of years ago. And Zachary was able to say, he calls my parents by their first name. He would say, "Oh, Matthew, you did such a good job playing Roger Dubree, and you looked beautiful in that dress." And he'll be able to remember not only how, I forget the actor's name, how the actor who played it in the film delivered the lines, but then how my father delivered the lines. And I can ask him, "Can you be, Gary Beach. Can you be Gary Beach playing Roger Dubree?" And he'll go, "Yes." And if you ask, "Can you be Matthew playing Roger Dubree?" he'll give me a slightly different tone that sounds like my dad's voice.
Yeah.
So those kinds of really in-depth character studies.
Like the tiny, minute details there.
That attention to detail and that focus on getting the script right was something that I had a lot of exposure to really early on.
Yeah.
That, it made that I was really detail oriented in what I was writing or what I was doing. And it made me realize that sometimes very subtle moments can be super impactful for people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And, as I have grown and moved into the film industry and then into researching for media industries and now kind of coming full circle, I'm always thinking about that, what might feel like dead space or like filler, it's not.
Yeah. It can have meaning to people.
It can be the most meaningful thing to people depending on the person.
Yeah. Yeah. So like depending on the audience that you're building your content for, it can really be, like that scene that you were thinking about cutting can really mean the difference between like having intrinsic meaning to that person and just being another video.
Yeah. And I mean, look, that's the reason that people will spend $70 for a re-release of Lord of the Rings so that they can get an extra 20 minutes of footage that was cut from the film. And that's maybe because they're obsessed with Elijah Woods, but I think it's because I think a lot of people, when they get engrossed in a story world or a story universe, that it becomes so intensely personal. And that's why, regardless of how you feel about like the new Star Wars film, there are Star Wars fans that will go regardless because it is Star Wars.
Absolutely.
And for my brother, it's that kind of thing where if there's a new Disney movie, doesn't matter what it is, we're going to see it. If there's an episode of Sharon, Lois, and Bram, he has seen it.
Yeah.
And okay, that means that we're watching VHS tapes that got put on YouTube in reruns, but he will watch them and he will learn every minute detail of an episode that then I have to go back and try and figure out.
Jeez, yeah, that's a challenge. Like that's a heck of an exercise for you, but that's amazing that he has that skill. And I can totally see where like those aspects of your personality come from now. Yeah. Like I've heard a lot about Zachary from you, from Harley, from all kinds of people that have been involved in his life. Right. And I feel like he and I have like satellited each other a couple times. Like we know of each other.
Yep.
And it's, I'd love to meet him at some point. That'd be an incredible.
He would be an incredible podcast guest. Let me tell you that.
That would be wild. That would be absolutely great. We got to have him on here at some point.
You let me know.
Zachary, you hear that?
You let me know.
Yeah. So this sort of translated into your career.
That's right.
Whereas like you became very detail oriented with what you were doing. You're doing research, so you have to look at the analytics and how things like how people react to things and what it really means. And I think that a lot of this came from interacting with your brother, and you were saying finding creative ways to help him over obstacles.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, whether it has been media content that I've created or it's been research that I've been doing, understanding the flow of information and how people process that information is incredibly important because, there are multiple modalities of learning, right? And so where you might be a visual learner, someone else might be an auditory learner, someone else might be a kinesthetic learner. And what I've come to realize is that with my brother, because he communicates through film scripts and TV and little bits and bobs from the pop culture that he's experienced, in trying to help him to get through some of the difficult things that he has experienced in his adult life, I have used those same techniques, the things that he's passionate about, and the things that he uses to make sense of his world in a way that isn't natural for me when I'm learning, but is natural for me when I'm teaching him. To be able to communicate in his modality, in what makes him feel comfortable and happy and whole. And so I was saying to you earlier that, about 2 years ago now, when I was home on field research, we had spent a fair amount of time helping him to, as then a 21-year-old young man who had the mental acuity of between a 4 and a 10-year-old, depending on the subject material, to start self-showering. And that's a difficult thing, and I don't think anyone wants to have to help another human to shower. I think most people, even if they're not fully aware of it, want to have the comfort and the safety of their own body and to be able to be healthy and clean. But for my brother, that was just a massive hang up. It was kind of like, I don't care, and you're forcing me to do this, and the water's too hot, and I don't like this. Right. It felt like a chore, and because he doesn't have the same social constructs that you or I do. It's kind of like, I'm happy to sit here and just be me.
Yeah.
But I knew it was important for his health. And so one of the things that I worked on while we were developing a practice of self-hygiene and self-care was really thinking about how we would deliver this system of information to him through almost like a film script.
Wow.
And,
Yeah.
And so, as I'm sitting there outside of the shower curtain and we're talking about how we get undressed and where we put our clothes and how we turn the water on. And while it can't be cold, but it can't be too hot, it needs to be just right. And so having to say that every day for months on end so that it would be ingrained into his brain and we would hear, and the water now is just right, was really wonderful to see that, at kind of every minute step, from getting that water just right to how do you hold your hand when you have poor motor skills, to be able to put shampoo in it, to be able to put it in your hair, throughout that 15-minute script that I developed with him. We were using all sorts of character voices and all sorts of little script techniques that you would see in children's television or children's film, so that he would remember that, if you're washing your knees, you should have washed everything above it because of the way that the water runs down your body, and so that you don't have to wash things twice. And after you get out of the shower, then how do you make sure that you wrap a towel around yourself so that you don't expose yourself to the rest of the house? And we've now gotten to a point where all of those little systems, from the shower to the teeth brushing to the hair combing, they might take him a little bit longer. He may not do them the same way or with the same adeptness that you or I might, but he has a sense of pride, and I can hear him upstairs when he is struggling to remember, go through the script. And if not, then he's just singing in the shower and enjoying himself. But he'll pop out of the shower now and come downstairs in his big blue bathrobe, and he'll say, Brony, I look very dashing today. And I'll say, yes, you look very dashing. He says, yes, I deserve a dashing appellation, which is a line from Inspector Gadget from the live action film. And I say, yes, you do deserve a dashing appellation. He says, yes, I think I look like tonight's guest star, Roger Moore, from episode 4 of season 5 of The Muppet Show. And I'll say, yeah, I think you do look like Roger Moore. And he'll say, yes, he'll touch his bathrobe. This is my velvet jacket like I wore in the movie. And we'll have to go through those lines to reaffirm and to almost praise him, to say like, wow, you were able to do this thing that a year ago was really, really difficult for you to do, and now you have a sense of pride in being able to do it and feeling good about yourself and receiving that positive affirmation. And it is then reflected in film clips and TV shows that he likes and he feels comforted by. So that in turn makes me hear those lines again and again and be like, wow, you really feel handsome. You really feel clean. You really feel like, wow, I did this thing that was really hard and now I know how. And I think that, and anytime that you're teaching somebody to do anything, you want to be able to inspire those same feelings that, yes, there are difficult things. There are things that don't come naturally to people. But if you can find a way to communicate with them through the modality that they feel comfortable with and maybe stretch yourself as a teacher, then they can walk away going, that experience was better for me than I expected. I learned something that was valuable, and now I have a sense of pride that I did a difficult thing and I've overcome it, and now I have it and no one can take it away from me.
Exactly. Yeah. That's huge too. Like learning how to communicate with people through means that they will absorb and understand, and like it becomes like learning a specific language for that person. And if we can translate that into greater aspects of life, like school and how we deal with each other in general, like that's huge. That's a very important part of life, and especially with TV broadcast and like the career path that you went for. I always find myself hung up on the idea of like, well, I want to do this creatively. This is what would make me feel good. And then I stop and I think about it and I'm like, but who would actually watch it? Like, who's going to want to consume this material and who's going to seek it out? How are they going to find it? You have to go through all those steps before you can really, start producing content.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this idea is something that I use with my students at Moravian College. And very often I will design a course that has multiple modalities so that students who want to read can read the material. Students who want a video and to have the interface with the professor can have it and they can watch it again and again. And I will often make my last essay assignment for them, which is the biggest part of their grade. Pick something from the class that stuck out to you. Anything, any of the theories we've used, any of the concepts, and then relate it to something that excites you. And that can be anything. That can be puppy videos on Facebook. That can be what you're watching on Netflix. That can be hardcore porn. That can be, what you're reading in the New York Times. I've had students who have written some really excellent papers. One last semester wrote me a really great paper on Minecraft and connecting it to some of these communications theories. And, this was a person that I think struggled with the traditional classroom environment and was really apprehensive about how they were writing the paper. But I could see that once they felt like I saw and heard them as a teacher and also didn't, put in that power dynamic of I am the professor and therefore you are the student and therefore you must do. I said, cool. Tell me about something that means something to you. Just connect it to something that you were assigned and you're responsible for and you're paying $3,000 for this class. And they wrote me out a really bang on paper. And so look, the same logics that I apply with my brother and I apply to my students are also applied in the industry. And so you raise a really great question. Just because it's something that you, the individual, are like, whoa, this is really awesome. I really want to fixate on this. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a massive viewership.
Right.
But then it's that dichotomy, right? Are you going to be 9 people's favorite thing, or are you going to be 900 people's 9th favorite thing?
Right.
And, as media makers, I think that we always toe that balance, right? Because we are hungry, we have our own ideas, and we hope, we dream that the things that we make are going to be wonderful for somebody else, especially when they're passion projects. They are being made for you, the creator, as well as for an intended audience. And so if you can strike a balance between those two positions and realize that there are going to be things that you fixate on that other people are like, why? I don't get it. And other things that you're going to have to make as a media maker that you're like, oh, this is tedious, but I know it's important. All right. If you can find that liminal space, the slip zone between those places, I find that you will come out with a product that has helped you to grow and has helped your audience to grow as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I've been creating content on YouTube, and it's a lot of it has been what I've wanted to create.
Like this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like this is something that I get to talk to people and I benefit from their creative knowledge, and then I feel like I'm giving something back. So it falls within that, like you said, the liminal space there, that little tiny zone between function and passion. And I talk about it on this podcast a couple times. I've had discussions with other people about it, where it's you really have to mitigate those things, because it's a fine balance between, okay, I'm going to make exactly what I want and I'm going to love it, and I'm going to make what everyone wants and everyone's going to love it, but I'm not going to enjoy it as much. So you have to find that passion where you're not giving yourself away. You're not doing everything for free just because you want to so bad, but you're also creating something that has value and worth to other people. And like, my recent experience with that has been I started creating like gear reviews, and I didn't really do that stuff before. I would do kind of gaming and talk about production and things like that. I felt like that gave some value to people. But when it came down to reviewing sort of off-brand stuff that fit in with film gear, and doing like in-depth reviews and putting up a whole video that's edited and looks nice, people really latched onto that. Like I started getting messages to my YouTube channel for the first time. And like you said, it's in that slip zone. So not to do a change here to like change the subject and bring us back to the...
No, that's okay.
I wanted to talk more about your history, because after middle school, you started to go into high school, college, and that's where like moving into the broadcast radio and like musicals was a big thing for you, like working in those zones.
Yeah, look, you know where we went to high school. There was a certain how do I want to characterize this? There was a certain culture and a certain type of demographic where it was a big football school in, suburban/rural Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
The school was surrounded by cornfields on three sides and a golf course on the other. Like,
Yeah.
if you wanted to be part of the quote unquote in crowd, that's what you did. You were part of the athletics department, especially
Right.
the football team. And look, for a very overweight, goofy kid from Allentown coming into a new school district, that was just not going to be me. So I took a lot of comfort in being, one of a very small handful of boys and then one of a very small handful of just people in general
Yeah.
who were involved in the fine arts, and then as I moved into high school, into the media arts. And I found a lot of comfort and sense of self and being able to explore through those things.
Yeah.
I learned how to temper my ego, learned how to, be less of an ass, especially when it comes to other people, and really work as a group. And so throughout, late middle school and then all throughout high school, both being part of the school drama club and being part of the, I don't know what you want to call it, broadcasting club, was a very big deal to me. And they both very much informed the path that I took in university. I had applied to one school for theater. I had an audition at Juilliard, and that was really lovely. Didn't get in.
I remember that. That was huge.
Yeah.
I remember when you were going for that. Everyone was so excited.
Yeah, look, it was a really great experience, and while that didn't ultimately become my path, there was a lot of me at the time that felt very comfortable being a character, being on stage, and being outside of the portion of myself that I wasn't yet comfortable in. And that's probably part of the reason why at 16 years old, going and auditioning in front of the greatest drama school in the country, not to knock Yale or NYU or any of the others, like, they saw that you can do beautiful voices and you can be very silly and you can sing nicely and dance well and all of those things. But if you don't understand your sense of self and therefore the character's sense of self, you lose that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like one appendage of where Jarrod was in high school.
Okay.
And then the other appendage was that, again, the roles that I was playing in the theater that I loved the most were things that my brother could relate to.
Yeah.
We did a production of You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, where I played Charlie Brown. We did a production of The Wizard of Oz, where I played the Cowardly Lion. And while we had done other serious plays and older musicals, and those were really nice, and I had a nice time, those weren't the things that I was really passionate about. The things that I was really passionate about were these very well-known, branded children's cartoons and characters. And so on the flip side of that portion of my extracurriculars was me taking classes and then eventually being the teaching assistant for the broadcasting classes that were run at Northwestern, where, you learn how to make a 30-second commercial. You, at Halloween, make a short horror movie. You learn how to do basic editing on, first I learned on Avid, and then I learned on Final Cut.
Yeah.
To the point that in my senior year, I was running the morning announcements. I was running the school's radio station, and also working on my own independent projects. And Kim Sutton, and then became Kim Fluso, was really good to me. And knowing that my brain was permanently in like character mode, that she would let me kind of like bend the rules for some of the projects, especially later on in my junior and senior year, to really think about what would that be like trying to make children's content, trying to make content that would inspire somebody like my brother to communicate, or would be something that someone like my brother would sit down and watch and go, oh yeah, that's pretty good, I think.
That's super interesting. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, look, some of it was really bad, I won't lie. Like, one of my initial videos, I grabbed an episode of The Muppet Show, which starred a comedian by the name of Avery Schreiber, and he did this totally nonsensical beep boop song with a whole bunch of Muppets, and I just green screened myself in, and I was trying to like make myself look like a Muppet through CGI. Oh, it was just abysmal. And I remember one of the people in the high school kind of looked at me, and they're like, "What the heck was that? That was really weird." I'm like, "Yeah, it didn't work out the way I wanted it to." But, the technical skills that I learned over that period of time eventually were honed, and they were good enough that they got me into undergrad, which was a degree in television and radio production at Ithaca College's Park School of Communications.
Gotcha.
Which at the time, like, my brain was so in character mode that I wasn't really thinking about that. It was kind of like, okay, well, if I can't be an actor, maybe I'll go and I'll be pre-law, or I'll go and do comm sciences. But Mrs. Fluso had kind of said, your production's really good. You really should go to school for production, and you really should look at Ithaca. And I thought, like, I've never heard of Ithaca. I don't know anyone who went to Ithaca, and I don't even think I want to apply. But I did wind up going, and her guidance provided me with a community that once I got onto that campus, even though the buildings are ugly and it was definitely cold, I was like, no, this is pretty much where I'm going to be. Yeah. I know it. These are the right people. These are people like me.
Wow. Okay.
And so I owe her a big hat tip in that direction.
Nice.
And look, so you graduate from high school, you go off, you leave the comforts of the little Lehigh Valley, and you go 4 hours north to upstate New York.
Yeah.
And now you're surrounded by people who also live in a character brain and who also have technical skills. My freshman year roommate, who I just spent this past weekend with, started out as a business major, but we would always sit and goof and kind of talk about the different things that were going on in my brain and his brain. He eventually wound up changing his major and going into theater design, and now he's designing for Broadway.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. So to go from, very nice Northwestern Lehigh to, kind of, what do they call Ithaca? That it's 40 square miles surrounded by reality, I think is what they call it.
Wow.
You go to a place where it's basically a whole bunch of, former Woodstock hippies, and the one blue district in a sea of red, and you find a group of professors and students who are driven by the professional practice of making and doing, and informed by the research and insights that guide a university. And while I didn't really appreciate everything that was going on at Ithaca at the time, because I was impatient, I look back at that experience now and say, man, when this PhD is done, if I'm going to go and be a professor somewhere, I want to be there. And not just because I'm nostalgic for it or because it's beautiful in the summertime with the gorges and the waterfalls and the wine trails.
Nice.
But, there was a real quality of care there in terms of teaching students that what they make is impactful. And unlike other universities that I applied to and got in that were an hour away, cough, cough, Syracuse, Ithaca guaranteed that from your first class, freshman year, you would have a camera in your hands on the first day.
Oh, wow.
And obviously, the longer you stayed in the program, the more that more expensive equipment you got to touch.
Yeah.
But that commitment to actually doing something rather than thinking about doing something or talking about doing something.
Practice versus theory.
Yeah. It was definitely more practice focused, but that doesn't mean that the theory went away.
Right, which is important.
Yeah. And so, look, I spent the first year at Ithaca just like banging through classes, and I had a really great professor by the name of Jerry Gamble, who was a producer in the upstate New York area. I mean, he had done a whole bunch of different things. And after my first class, which was a field production class, I had kind of run through the assignments because they were so similar to what I was teaching.
Yeah.
Now, freshman and sophomore high school students to do the year prior. He said, I don't really actually think you need to be here to do this. He's like, your skills are really quite good. I mean, yeah, obviously there's more you can learn here, but in terms of starting your own thing, you could go out to LA and compete with some of our juniors and seniors for jobs.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I kind of said oh, well, that's great, but then why am I paying for this education?
Yeah.
And he said, okay, well, what do you really want to do? And at the time I had kind of two big interests. The first was that I was very travel hungry, and I was thinking about kind of the world in which we live in. And so I was like, wow, there's part of me that would love to go and travel and do all of this stuff. But I came back to the core, which is I want to make kids content. And maybe I want to make international kids content. And maybe I want to make something that will unite children around the world and world peace and a nice UN mission statement somewhere later.
Yeah.
He said, well, you should probably still take some production classes, but you should really think about pushing into a research focus and changing your advisor and finding people who can help you do that. And so then over the next 2 years, I was able to find really wonderful people, both on the production side and the theoretical side. People like, I'll give shout outs to Jack Powers, Kati Lischik, Devin Rosen. They were able to really guide. Oh, and Ben Crane, can't forget about Ben Crane. They were really able to kind of guide how I was thinking about the content I was creating and the content that I wanted to make, to the point that my senior year, I was doing research on the advertising in between Cartoon Network broadcasts to try and study how many McDonald's commercials and Trick cereal commercials would come up, and whether, the actual broadcasting standards were appropriate for nutritional advertising to children.
Right.
At the same time, publishing a solo paper looking at how the Sesame Workshop in New York made Sesame Street and how that compared to European co-productions in Germany with Sesamstrasse, in Norway with Sesamstraat, and in Kosovo, which, because of the language split, there were 2 different broadcasts that were happening in 2 different languages.
Oh, wow.
And, to understand that within the continental dynamics of Europe and then the individual cultural dynamics of, Germany, Norway, and Kosovo. And then to take that paper a step further and then compare it to the Middle East, and to look at the Sesame co-productions in Israel and Palestine. And there was another one. I guess I should reread that paper. But, to go from freshman year, first semester, being like, cool, I'm probably going to be one of those cool guys sitting in a basement being a techie and an editing guru, to then being like, I'm sitting here in, the middle of Hamburg on what should be my spring break, drinking beer, having just met, the puppeteer who played Ernie.
Oh, wow.
And looking at the production of, one of the most beloved children's television shows in the US and in Germany.
Wow.
That was a real big kick for me to say that, that's quite a big step from wanting to be Big Bird and then to make Big Bird and then to research Big Bird.
Yeah. Like why Big Bird is Big Bird and can be that popular and huge. That's really awesome. I've actually kind of found this weird theme where a lot of the creatives that I talk to on this podcast, they talk about a turning point in their education at some point. For the last guest, it was actually, they dropped out of high school because they were at the point where like they knew what they wanted to do. They wanted to record music. They were already working in the industry. They were in a band that had the opportunity to go tour. So it was just like, all right, all signs point to yes, let's go this direction. And they made that leap. Others, like I'll talk about like my personal experience has been, I went to a college, like I was going up to school in Canada for music at first. And I thought that was my calling. And then it was all about written music. And I was like, okay. Switched over to psych and I was like, this is super interesting, but I want to be doing stuff with cameras. And I had known that for a little while, but I just kind of hadn't jumped into it. So I was working as a photographer. I was doing wedding photos and portraits with a company, Alan Dean Photography, up in Ottawa. And I started going to Algonquin College which is like a technical school for photography techniques. And I had the same experience sort of as you, where the instructor came up to me at one point and they're like, listen, like you're already basically doing this. Like you have the skill that you need. You're not going to learn anything new from these courses here. And it kind of like shocked me for a second. I was like, oh geez, like that's kind of weird that a professor would say that to me. And then I like actually sat down and talked with him and we had this long conversation. He goes, what is it you actually want to be doing? Because this is, you're getting an education in something that you want to pay your bills right now. It's not that passion for you. And I started thinking about it and I'm like, you know what? Every time we're out shooting, I start doing like behind the scenes video of everyone where like I start to be the videographer. Oh, I can get a job in video. And that just like turned literally it just felt right. And you just start moving in that way. I think there's something about that, like taking the leap to do the thing it might be scary to some people, might come across as daunting to just change your major or change your career or drop out of high school or whatever, college, whatever it is, to make a big change like that is scary, but it can be so rewarding if you follow through with that path.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the parallels between your and my journeys are, well, I'm not surprised, let's say that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I've seen this kind of again and again where people who are in the media industries or who study the media industries, as is the case with the academics that I'm around, you know, there is kind of that terminal tipping point. There's a guy in my department who for a while had dropped out of high school so that his band could go on tour and could do the thing. And now he's off getting a PhD studying the music industries in Myanmar.
Oh,
And
wow.
like, you know, everyone makes their own way. And I don't think that there's a prescribed path in the media industries. And I think people who tell you otherwise are only really speaking from their experience and maybe from the mistakes they have made or the mistakes they've seen their friends make. But we live in an industry we work in an industry where it is so much about who you know and the quality of your craftsmanship and getting the right person at the right time to go, they've done enough. That's what we need. Great. And from there, you hope that it can skyrocket.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee of that, of course, but I think that if you're in a creative field and there's no risk, then it's not creative, is it?
Yeah. Like I think creativity, like, have you ever heard of the psychological state of flow?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the peak of challenge, creativity, and like physical ability. So like someone playing piano, but it's a piece that's challenging for them, but they know it. So they're playing it to the point where they're existing a few notes in the future. You know, they're a few beats ahead, and that puts you into this psychological mindset of like, you know, your ability to perceive time sort of changes. Like your blood pressure can go way down. Like all kinds of things can happen to your body that are really healthy, first of all. But second, it just puts you in a different mind state, and like getting into a field either that puts you in that position or like working alongside people that get into that, it becomes like such a learning experience and such a powerful thing that you can't like hold back anymore. It just sort of pulls you in that direction.
Absolutely. And I think, as we were talking about earlier, that's one way that creative adults recapture the sense of play that they lose from childhood. Because when you're so small and you're just go and you pick up whatever it might be, a doll, a ball, the remote control to a television, the pencil, and those things become rocket ships or giant jelly beans or whatever it might be. Your little brain, you know, let's say between 3 and 7 years old,
Right.
you know, that kind of preschool or early school years, the synapses are firing so quickly that you don't even know that you're in a flow state where, you know, you are not only playing in ways that you may have seen that character play on TV or ways that your brother or sister might have taught you how to play, but you are making moments of discovery. And so we as adults, we become socialized to these systems, whereas you said with the pianist that the piece is what it is. Right. You know your physical abilities and disabilities or limitations. Right. And so you can exist in a space where, all right, I'm working to get this piece to a place where I feel like I am playing. I feel like I can release from the difficulty of it and I can start to really enjoy and let my mind go back to that place of discovery. I find it, especially with runners, you know, you will know that at a certain mile marker, you'll hear marathon runners say, your brain kind of shuts off and you get into the flow state where it's kind of like, cool, my breathing is regulated, my legs are moving, I know how I need to move and modulate for an incline or a decline, and it's only when your body then is really, really taxed at those like last couple miles that the adrenaline is gone and that your body's like, okay, now I need to really work to get this space. You know, I feel like kids also have that kind of dynamic where their imagination is limitless and boundless because they haven't been bounded by the social constructs of adults. But that doesn't mean that as they age, they won't have those moments of, wow, I feel like this is really hard. This is really frustrating. And so I look at creative adults who are able to recapture a portion of that childhood moment of discovery and to
Yeah.
personify it in whatever they are doing and say that that's what I have hoped that everything that I do is, whether I'm on the stage, behind the camera, writing about being on the stage or behind the camera,
Yeah.
or anything in between.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. There's so much breadth there that you can cover, and yet like there's so many different ways that if you're open to opportunities and you're open to, oh, hey, like you would probably be good at this, like because you're really passionate about like opportunities like that show up professionally. There's all kinds of ways that we can fall into these roles where we find that again and we rediscover those. Like we were talking before the podcast, I had been working on a music video with my buddy that was on the show last time. And we all got to like dress up in costumes. We had like medieval armor on, and I kind of realized at one point, like back in grade school, this is what I used to do with my best friends. Like we'd walk around the property and just like, role play. Like we were basically doing an RPG or like D&D, but with costumes on. And that's exactly what we were doing in that music video. And everyone was so involved. They were early. Someone offered to pay for like the meal for everyone. And it was like 9 people. So that was significant. Like it was just the most like positive production experience that I feel like I've almost ever had, just because of like how involved everyone was and how everyone kind of refound that childhood, like, let's go play pretend for a little bit.
Yeah, it reminds you just how many people want to be Gandalf with a carpet in their backyard. As you said, cracking the ice and going,
you shall not pass. Boom. Oh, it's beautiful. So you've started to move more towards the research end of things.
That's right.
With this, and particularly researching like kids content. So stuff that's geared towards children.
That's right.
And this took you a lot of places. Like you had mentioned Germany, but you also mentioned London and LA at some point. So like what were you doing out there?
So I had kind of pushed through my time at Ithaca quite fast. I did it in 3 years instead of 4. And part of that was well, look, university is expensive. I have a younger sister who's 10 months younger than me, so she's a year behind me in university. And even though I was a good scholarship boy, it still costs money.
Oh yeah.
And my brother, even though he's pretty low maintenance and a happy chappy, he still costs money. So I had really pushed to finish Ithaca quickly, and I had known then that the people that I saw as professional mentors and the people that I aspired to have their job in 20 years. Many of them had master's degrees, many of them had PhDs, many of them had studied things like education or child development or psych. And I thought, well, okay, that stuff is interesting and it certainly informs what I do, but I think that there's something far more interesting here, which is that the children's media industry as such, all of the different big companies that make content for kids and their families, is relatively understudied. So I had put in a pitch based on some insights that I found about my research into a double master's fellowship in global media and communications. So I had sent in my Sesame Street paper, and I had said, I'm really interested in studying how children's content across different cultures is developed and made, and then how it is received. There was a really interesting paper that I had read at that time, which was talking about Scandinavian children culture and how very often in Scandinavia, in Finland and Norway and Sweden and Denmark, the children have much more time to play, and that the content that was being made was geared without so much of an educational or pedagogical focus. It was less Sesame Street as we know it here in the States with letters and numbers, but it was more about health and wellness. It was more about social things. It was more about providing content that was not only entertaining, but that would teach children about something that would impact the rest of their lives, not just their childhood, but their adult lives. And so I thought, wow, that's really cool. And also, like, the schools that I had gone to, I attended the London School of Economics and Political Science, and then the University of Southern California's Annenberg School. At the time, these were number 1 and number 2 of the world's top-ranked communication schools, and they kind of have been since then. I mean, they circle around, let's say, like the top 5.
Wow.
So
Okay.
so to be able to go and be one of, I think we started out with about 70 students that did the first year at LSE.
Okay.
One of 9 Americans in a global program of people that were studying writ large global media and communications, and
Yeah.
being the token American guy that was the only person studying kids content was really interesting, because you're surrounded
Okay.
by economists and anthropologists and political scientists who are bringing in, really great French philosophy and saying, well, Foucault's panopticon, and well, let's look at this from a Marxist lens. And it was stuff that in suburban rural Pennsylvania we never got in school.
Yeah. Like, we're not going to get that sort of interpretation or viewpoint.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I mean, even at a very liberal and progressive place like Ithaca College, because it was so production focused, I wasn't sitting there, reading French head theory.
Right.
So to be able to take what I had up to that point and now be stuck reading a whole bunch of stuff that was like, wow, this feels really over my head to start,
Right.
apply it to production and industry and to cartoons,
Yeah.
initially felt like, wow, big fish out of water, super prestigious school. I feel really stupid. But I came to a point then where, after the first semester of, being like, wow, I'm living in another country. Wow, the currency here is different. The phone numbers are really long.
Yeah.
And wow, this shared kitchen is not at all something that I'm digging. I kind of fell into my own, and I started working on my first master's thesis,
Okay.
which was looking at the Disney Princess franchise.
Interesting.
At the time, there were a whole bunch of articles that were coming out on like The Atlantic and BuzzFeed saying, oh, if Disney princess characters were drawn realistically, their boobs would look like this, their butts would look like that, their hair would be, a giant mess in the wind, their eyes, if they were proportional to their face, would look like this, not like that. And so I thought, wow, that's really interesting. There's always been this cultural critique of Disney that, it is the big devil in the room, and I understand a lot of those critical communications. Those critiques, right? I understand where they're coming from in terms of the political economy of Disney. But then I also see that for children and for families, Disney is really important.
Oh, yeah.
And so, yes, you can go all neoliberal determinist and say that Disney is evil. And yeah, look, any major company, they're going to do things that are unsavory. But I also say, wow, this is a company that is really important. And these Disney princess characters, whether it was, 80-year-old Snow White, or at the time it was Anna and Elsa were coming out for Frozen. That was right before that big boom hit.
Wow. Yeah, that was huge.
You can see that over the history of the company that things have changed. The way that they used physical models to animate the women changed. The storylines and constructs of, Snow White saying, oh, someday my prince will come, versus at the time Disney had Brave Out with Merida, who's like, no, I'm going to fight for my own hand. I don't want to be married. You look at that dichotomy, and over the course of 80 years, that's a big paradigm shift. So I thought, okay, can we look at the way that these women, these female characters, because some of them are girls, have been animated, and look at their physical dimensions and see, all right, are BuzzFeed and at the Atlantic just like making political commentary,
right?
But then can we look at that and also see the way in which their storylines happen? So one of the things that I was very interested at the time was in feminist media studies. I had done a lot of reading and thought, okay, well, when female characters are typically drawn by men, they're done so with a male gaze. And so at the time, Disney, especially early on, there were a lot of male animators. And, the place of a woman in a household in the 1930s and 1940s in America was culturally very different than that of the 1960s, or certainly the 1980s, when the Disney Renaissance happened and The Little Mermaid came out in, I think, 1989. And then we moved through like a whole bunch of Disney princesses all the way through the 90s. So I kind of wanted to see, like, all right, are we seeing that those characters that have more traditionally sexualized dimensions, a larger chest, a smaller waist, a bigger hip ratio, maybe bigger lips or bigger eyes, are those the ones that are more or less likely to say, I want a prince. A prince is going to save me. Or are they more or less likely to say, I can do it on my own?
Right.
And so I had done kind of a massive study looking at this and found some really interesting things that over the course of, Disney's corporate history, that has changed.
Yeah.
And that the way that women have been animated has changed, and the way that their storylines have been written have changed. And at the time, there was a big corporate initiative from Disney, which was saying, like, listen, Cinderella was written in 1950. Can't do anything about that. It is still one of our most beloved films. It is based on a fairy tale. This is what happened in the fairy tale. This is what happened in our movie.
Right.
But now we're going to make direct-to-video sequels. And are we going to give Cinderella, the character across the brand, more autonomy? And are we going to think when, we include her that, yes, of course, she ends up with Prince Charming, and that was the plot of the original movie.
Right.
But is that now in 2005 or whenever they made the direct-to-video sequel, are we going to fixate on that? We can't stray away from that necessarily because that is the original story universe.
Right.
But can we update it and modernize it and give her a little bit more femme power? Can we femme power her to the point where little girls will say, I still want to watch the original movie and buy the dress and the shoes, but also Cinderella is strong and mighty.
So like redefining the social role of the characters, and then also like the lens through which they're portrayed. Like you were saying that they were primarily drawn by men. Like most of the animators at Disney back in the day were men. And
most animators, period, were men back then.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there was probably a point where it was like all at Disney. So they were portrayed through the lens of a male gaze. And now, as more female animators get in, and as more female writers get in, that lens is changing, but then also the social view of like that character, like where that character would be and what that character would do. They're updating that in order to modernize.
That's right.
But it's a balance between that and staying true to the story, or like staying true to the franchise and the IP, like
intellectual
idea.
property, right?
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of that time in London, not only enjoying my time being in Europe, but thinking about that idea, and then actually using that interest to, in my last couple of months in London, I had been looking for internships out in LA, and I had gotten in contact with a woman by the name of Madeline Donano. And Madeline was she is the CEO of the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media. And Gina Davis from Thelma and Louise and Beetlejuice and A League of Their Own had this really wonderful mission with a USC professor at the time by the name of Stacy Smith to try and rebalance the proportion of young girls and women shown in especially children's content and then in family content as well. Okay. And so Gina and Madeline were going to a lot of the different big studios and saying, this script is great. What would change if you made this boy a girl? What would change if you changed the race of this character? How can we get more women was certainly the big priority, but then also intersectional identities to be represented in content.
Yeah, representing a larger audience.
That's right.
Gotcha.
And so I was very impassioned by their mission, and I had written an email saying like, hey, I'm going to be in LA. Can I volunteer? Can I hand out bulletins? Do you have any need for an intern to send emails? And Madeline was kind enough to actually offer me the first ever C. Jane Fellowship. C. Jane is one of their branches within the nonprofit itself.
Okay.
But yeah, from there, I was able to get a team of 6 fellow graduate students that I oversaw as my interns. So I was asking for an internship, and I then had 6 interns.
Yeah.
And we looked at, across 30 years of film, we looked at the top 100 films from each of those years. We looked at their box office statistics and saw how much did they bring in on the opening weekend, how much was the overall gross, how many ticket sales were there, and we correlated that data of what were the most financially successful and commercially viewed films here in the United States across 30 years with a test known as the Bechdel test. And
Okay.
the Bechdel test is something that was it was a very simple cartoon made by a woman named Alison Bechdel, who is a very popular cartoonist and an LGBTQ plus activist.
Okay.
And in the cartoon, there are two women talking to each other, and they basically said, I want to see a film where two women are in the same scene and they talk to each other about something other than a man. And they said, see if you can find a film where that happens.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
so it's a very simple and some people will say a very myopic, gender test, but it was something that I thought would be really interesting. And so I ran this study where me and my 6 friends / interns watched tons and tons of films to see over time, are the films that are making the most money Bechdel test approved, and has that gotten better over time? And we actually found that it did.
Wow.
We found that over the 30-year period that more tests were passing the Bechdel tests, and that that was a really inspiring thing. What we did find though is that in the 2000s that those tests that were passing the Bechdel test were not necessarily the ones that had the highest ticket sales. So then we thought, okay, what's the actionable result here, right?
Right.
And it's to say to the film studios that if you have a film that has, 2 female characters that are very strong, that you need to be pushing those marketing materials to see if they can't get more butts and seats in opening weekend.
Right.
Once people see it, they will see it and they will go, yeah, cool, we'll go and see it again. We'll tell our friends. But it's that initial push.
Right.
So yeah, that was not only the kind of the guiding force through then my time in LA, while I worked on the Gina Davis thing, and I was doing an extension off of my Disney thesis to do what we call a giant discourse analysis, or you kind of look at the power dynamics of the Disney company and the CEOs and thinking through, how during Walt Disney's era of animation, things were very different than when Michael Eisner was running the company, or very different than when Bob Iger's running the company.
Right.
So I had those 2 projects on while also interning for Common Sense Media, which is, I know, I spent a lot of time on the highway.
You're a busy guy.
Yeah, I sat in the angry bowl of spaghetti that is the 405 more often than I would have liked in my 1999 Mercury Sable.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. Oh no. It was an hour and a half to the internship, 2 hours back, and it was 10 miles. Yep.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
But so look, doing a thesis on Disney, studying the most popular films and looking for, can you see Jane? Can you see where the women are in film? And then working for Common Sense and trying to, what Common Sense Media does, and now they're just called Common Sense, is that they are basically a giant review board of children's content where we have different people who will read children's storybooks and say, here are the themes. Here's the age that we think it's appropriate for. And they will also watch shows, everything from Sesame Street to Family Guy. Hey, in this episode of Family Guy, you're going to see this nip slip. You're going to hear this lewd reference. You're going to, concerned parents might want to think about X, Y, and Z.
Right. Gotcha.
So in some ways, they are seen as a giant review board. They also did a whole bunch of really interesting curriculum around media literacy and other things that I felt would impact, children and families. And so, LA was kind of a big blur, to be honest, because I had 3 massive projects. And then the only reason I decided to do the second master's in the first place was that my academic mentor, and as he has said, numerous students have called him the Gandalf or the Yoda to their academic journeys. A guy named Henry Jenkins had published numerous books talking about a whole myriad of subjects, everything from his term of convergence culture to kind of participatory politics through media. But he had published a book early on in his career in the late 90s called The Children's Culture Reader. And so he had collected a whole bunch of scholars that were thinking about different facets of children's culture. And it was one of my first exposure to kind of that literature and thinking through the way that children are socialized through our adult world and how they not just consume media in oh no, what happens if Timmy watches this cartoon? Is he now going to like rap music? Is he now going to be more susceptible to doing heroin?
Yeah.
But actually thinking about children's agency and thinking that children, even though they're not as developmentally developed as adults, that they can have their own taste cultures and that they don't necessarily need to make sense. So I went out to LA and did a full master's at USC when I probably didn't need one, for the sole purpose of taking 2 classes with Henry Jenkins. And
wow,
it was a very expensive investment, but I wouldn't trade it for the world.
that's incredible.
He today, in my doctoral research, greatly informs what I do, and the way that he looks at popular culture and the power of popular culture in a digital media age. And anyone who wants to read boring scholarly material, Henry's work is certainly not boring, and he explains why Harry Potter is so important to you, or why Pee-wee's Playhouse is so fundamentally different and life-changing to children. In a way that other academics that I had been reading just couldn't capture. Between a thesis, the Gina Davis Institute, Common Sense Media, and Henry Jenkins, that was basically the whole of my time in LA, other than sitting on the freeway.
Yeah. Okay. So that's really interesting. The point that you talk about, where like kids culture has gained this credibility these days. Like I feel like back in the 70s, when like the plastics industry really started to jump out of the woodworks. That's terrible. So like there was a huge upscale in manufacturing of toys,
right?
And that's when people started to realize, like, okay, if you're advertising to children on TV, then all of a sudden you can use those children to leverage the buying power of their parents.
That's right, the nag factor.
Yeah, and that was this whole era of just like predatory marketing almost, where they're directing things at kids. It's like, go ask your parents for this thing, the next Game Boy Power magazine, whatever.
Yeah, of course.
And nowadays, like we've started switching towards like, oh shoot, like we should actually gear our material towards the children, not towards like, okay, this is what's going to motivate the kids to do what we want. It's like we're giving children what they want, what they find valuable, and what they choose to engage with. And there's all kinds of different new ways to qualify that, to like say that, like you were, you mentioned your work with, you started working with like big companies after this. You mentioned working with Netflix and curating playlists for children, and being able to test a playlist, like put up, something. You mentioned something related to like Bear in the Big Blue House, or an episode of a Nat Geo show where they would have content that's about bears, and you could have things that were related but all curated for children. And then because the kids would have the iPad in front of them, they'd be able to look through the playlist, you could see what their choices were directly.
Yeah.
So it was a research method within a content delivery method.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, there's a lot of things that I think I see a thread through, so bear with me for a second.
Sure.
In the 1970s and in the 1980s, when children's television programming moved away from being just the educational pedagogical things like Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, or maybe the more earlier, the friendlier kind of less educational things like Captain Kangaroo or Howdy Doody.
Yeah.
Once you start getting into an era where animation was cheaper to make, and where the plastics industry, yes, was on the rise, and the consumer goods kind of scholars and practitioners saw children as really a consumer group to really start targeting, and not through the mother and the mom in the household, where, if you market to mommy will buy, and that will be good for the house.
Right.
But that children have their own taste culture. That's when you see the rise of things like the whole reason we have the Transformers cartoon, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Hot Wheels. I mean, those cars and toys were designed to sell toys. The TV shows that children fell in love with were actually the promotional materials.
Yeah, it was the marketing material for the toys.
Yeah, and today that's very different, where now it's, we're going to push the show, and if the show does well, of course we want you to buy the lunchbox and the pajamas and the plushie.
Yeah.
So so I think pulling that forward and seeing that, look, there's a whole podcast to be done on, the fluctuations of the children's consumer industry and media industry from the 1970s through the 80s through the 90s with different regulations here in the United States alone, let alone throughout other places like Western Europe. I think we can end up kind of where I'm at or where I was at the time working with Netflix and saying that the logics here that were starting to be unpacked back then are still somewhat the same in a platformized era, right?
Right.
Where Netflix is very different than the TV set that you and I had when we were children.
Absolutely.
We weren't as bad as our parents where it's like, we had channels 3, 6, and 10. That was it.
Yeah.
Let's say that there were 100 channels, 200, 300 channels, depending on your cable package, satellite package. How many kids' channels were there? I mean, in my house, it was Nickelodeon, the Disney Channel, and Cartoon Network. I know with friends, there may have been additional packages or spin-offs of those channels.
Right.
But those channels had, they were broadcast regulated. So if you wanted to watch Blue's Clues or you wanted to watch Keenan and Kel, you knew that at a certain, right, Keenan and Kel.
Oh, yeah. All that.
Oh, here it goes.
So good. So good.
Who loves orange soda? Kel loves orange soda.
The Frenchman in the bathtub.
Oh, I love it.
Incredible. Such a great show. Definitely worth watching if you haven't seen that.
Yes, there's a reaction video to be made by us sitting here and watching that.
Oh, Lord.
But yeah, look, so you and I, when we were growing up, we were beholden to the broadcasting schedule.
Right.
With a platform like Netflix, any time of the day, from any myriad of devices, you can log in and get content that has been selected and purchased by the people at Netflix on demand.
Yeah.
And so for a child, just in the same way that you have a, toy box full of toys and you get to pick out what you want to play, giving a child a certain amount of agency over what is, a flat screen toy box of things to watch and to play along with or to just be entertained by or to learn from. It was really interesting to try and think about Netflix as my first job out of school and use what I had really learned to, try and make a collection about bears because, bears are a thing that kids understand. They might have a teddy bear. There are any number of bear cartoon characters that have come across over the years.
Yeah.
Is bears enough of a pull like dinosaurs or race cars to be a thing? Like, do kids say, "Oh, mommy, I want to decorate my bedroom as bears," or "Oh, dad, can we play grizzly bear like can we play dinos?" I don't know. Do we have enough content? Yeah, I think so. You slap Winnie the Pooh together with Little Bear, with Rupert the Bear, with the Nat Geo documentary, and okay, we have 20 titles. Let's drop this into the Netflix Sea. See if the algorithm pops it up to the top and what it gets connected to based on the keywords you use.
Yeah.
And let's see if that resonates with kids. Let's see if that's something they click on. Let's see if the idea of bears as being a trend or of a word of importance is in fact important.
Yeah. I imagine that keyword set for children is vastly different than that of adults too.
Yes. So we had a separate tagging system. I mean, some of the ideas that would go into coding content for adults would overlap, especially for things that were family content and not kids content. So,
right.
Right now, I don't know any adult who would really want to sit down and watch Baby Shark on YouTube. A lot of adults are like, Baby Shark, Baby Shark. That I would say is content that is specifically made for children in mind.
Right.
Where a movie like Toy Story, which is certainly made with children in mind, is also palatable enough for adults that they will sit there and watch it with their children or might watch it on their own, even though it is a film that's made by a major animation company and therefore culturally deemed for children.
Right.
And children will love the adventures of Buzz and Woody, and mom and dad will laugh at the joke that Woody calls Buzz Bud Lightyear. And kids won't get it. They'll go, "Oh, he messed up his name." They won't get the beer reference.
Right.
So then applying that logic to tagging and to curating playlists at Netflix, yes, there were some films that had overlap with what you would see on the quote unquote adult, not like adult, but like adult Netflix and kids Netflix, but the tagging system was largely separate. And so that was
Gotcha.
part of my idea, was thinking about what tags do we have? What tags should we create to make effective playlists and to get insights about our child audience in relation to their family that will make it meaningful. And that's everything from something like a collection about bears to happy films to, I mean, we never did this, but you could technically do something as niche as like content for girls and young women who like princess characters, but their parents want them to have alternative heroes between the ages of 3 and 10.
Yeah.
You know,
you can really dive deep with the analytics there.
Yeah, I mean, now you're getting into really micro niche targeting, and
Right.
I certainly didn't have that experience. I'm trying to also speak about it broadly while being informative because NDAs are a thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I think the broad logic of what I was doing was looking at the architecture that we had at Netflix and trying to create not only experiences that were an overall Netflix kids experience that was great and would let little ones feel very safe and parents feel very safe to let them go and explore and to play in our platform, but also that we could give them moments of discovery that they may not find themselves, and to see can adults create moments of discovery still today that are different and meaningful and valuable that could become kind of the Netflix exclusive. We have this idea or this thing that started here.
Yeah.
And so taking that idea of what I learned at Netflix was incredibly helpful then kind of moving forward and designing some of the other experiences with some of the other consultancies that I had.
Right.
I know I told you earlier that after I had finished 2 very long contracts with Netflix, I had taken on a contract with a firm called Immersive Youth Marketing, and we were working on a big campaign for HBO.
Right. Yeah.
And so the HBO campaign, we were really thinking about how do we get college students and people coming straight out of high school to pay for HBO on a college campus.
Yeah. Okay.
Because, much like Netflix, you want users, you want people to pay for your service. And so we were thinking, well, what are the offerings that we have? How do you take Game of Thrones and Girls and Silicon Valley and make that attractive on a college campus? How do you design watch parties and events and put up a giant throne of swords in the middle of a college campus where people are like, cool, I want to take a picture with that. I'm going to Instagram the crap out of it.
Yeah.
And therefore, when 2 weeks later HBO hosts the giant watch party, I'm going to get excited and all of my friends are going to go. And then when they give us the year discount where we don't have to pay for the first year, but then we'll pay for the year afterwards, will you create that brand loyalty and retention?
Yeah.
Thinking about that's then the upper end of kind of where I've studied young people's engagement, not necessarily kids, but not kids, people who are still exploring and learning. A lot of the logics that I had pulled from Netflix could be applied into more direct marketing and promotional campaigns for HBO.
Okay.
We ultimately didn't win that pitch, but even so, to be able to have that experience to work on something like that, as well as some of the other clients we were working with at the time, it was invaluable. And it to be able to see the industrial differences between Netflix as an insider and me working on a pitch for HBO, thinking that we would be insiders, it's like, wow, these platforms as, SVOD, OTT content offerings feel in some ways so similar, just with different shows, but at the same time, they're so very different.
Yeah. Yeah. The audiences that they're shooting for, the way that they organize their content, the way that they even just design their interface can have a very a variety of effects on the way that people engage with the content.
Yep.
So like the interface that Netflix has is very different from HBO.
Of course.
There are a lot of similarities in some of the details. Like obviously there's thumbnails for everything, and you hover over and it like there's similarities, but the way that they deliver content to you is different. Even the way that they organize their genres are different.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
And the value proposition there now in 2020 is like, okay, with the release of Disney Plus, you look at the players I look at the players in the kids media marketplace and I say, wow, it's really interesting that DreamWorks has a massive partnership with Netflix.
Yeah.
Disney now has kind of scooped back up most of their stuff.
Yeah.
Amazon has largely backed off from making new and original content, and they're just kind of licensing out for a fee because Amazon wants you to go to Amazon to buy stuff on Amazon. The content they offer is as a perk. And then yet you get HBO, who is known on one hand for like title boxing matches and like really sexier content that you can show on Netflix, more nipples and bottoms.
Yeah.
But then that's where Sesame Street decides to have a massive partnership and to release a new cartoon as well. Esme and Roy, it's I guess a year or two old now.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so looking at the media industry's model and saying, okay, well, Sesame Street's still on PBS, but HBO gets that first run. They get it, I think, 6 to 8 weeks beforehand as a way of helping to boost the funding mechanism for the Sesame Workshop. It's like, wow. Okay, you're seeing where, no question, Disney is like the pillar. And now that they own Lucasfilms, they own the Henson Company, they own Marvel, they own ESPN and ABC and you're like, wow, you're such a monolith. And yet there are other production companies and even just small productions that are like, okay, we see you, Disney, we got you, but we're going to go over here. And so thinking through those things in terms of what different producers and directors and creators want for not only their show's brand and value proposition, but who they align themselves with and where they envision themselves living outside of a network broadcast era where a Nickelodeon show looks a certain way. It's different than a Disney show or a Cartoon Network show. Now you have to say, is a Netflix show vastly different from an HBO show? Well, could you put House of Cards next to Game of Thrones and go, yeah, kind of similar?
Right.
Does it work the same way with kids' content? And I think that's a big struggle that people are facing, especially in the age where children like my niece and nephew who are 5 and 7, they watch things on TV, but more often than not, the TV's in the background with the very expensive, well-made content. They're sitting with my tablet or my phone in their laps, and they're watching suburbanites make YouTube videos, and those suburbanites are pulling a good chunk of the attention economy of young ones.
Yeah, that's a good segue. Actually, I don't mean to skip over the other like jobs that you were talking about afterwards, but the content on YouTube that really reaches kids audiences, I really want to hit that like within this podcast, just because you started going into the research end with YouTube heavily.
That's right.
And it started with toy unboxings.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So at the time that I was working on the HBO gig, I had been contacted by a professor of mine that I did not have him at USC, but he was a friend by the name of David Craig, and he said, "Hey, I'm working on a book with a guy named Stuart Cunningham down in Australia, and we're talking about what they called social media entertainment, or content that was made to be entertaining and was specifically for a social media platform."
Yeah,
they
like
had
Vine videos, things like that.
Yeah, it was mostly YouTube, a little bit of Facebook, Vine, Snapchat, Insta, Twitch. But it was most of their interviews were very YouTube focused, and they said, you're a kids media guy. Do you know anything about these toy unboxers? I'm like, well, yeah, I know that they make a lot of money, and I know that they're kind of like elusive and really hard to get in touch with. They're like, cool. Well, if we pay you to like fly around the country, can you try and find some of these people and interview them for us for our book and then for probably an offshoot paper? And at the time, I was thinking like, yeah, okay, that sounds fine. I need money.
You ended up talking to a bunch of them too.
Well,
what was it like?
Not initially though. So initially, before I had started the PhD, this would have been in early 2016, late 2015, early 2016.
Okay.
I had reached out to 150 different YouTube channels.
Yeah.
And nobody got back to me. And I thought, oh man, this contract is going to go south real fast. Like, it's not for lack of trying. I'm doing the research. I'm digging through this stuff. And finally, there were 2 channels that after I had sent a second round of interviews and was like, listen, here is, what I need to do. I'm just an academic, and like, even though I'm an industry guy, like, I'm gonna go and ask you a series of questions. Here are the questions. Can we talk about? At the time, Stuart and David were looking at a very regulatory angle, saying like, should this space be regulated?
Okay.
And the 2 channels got back to me and said, all right, if we don't talk about regulation, we'll talk to you, but you have to come to us. So I flew to each of their respective locations. And I sat down and we started really talking about, well, how do you make toy unboxing videos? How did you get started doing this, very weird thing?
Yeah.
How much money does it make you? Why are you doing it? And what struck me at the time in this research that Stuart and David didn't uncover, and really nobody else had uncovered in the popular press or in academic press, was that a lot of these people were actually, instead of competing with one another, were working to share production practices in a backroom Facebook page.
Oh, wow.
That they were saying, hey, I have a really good relationship with this toy company, or hey, here's this giant spammer. We need to get him out of here because we're making great stuff for kids.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine there was one instance where the word toy and the unboxing of a toy can easily get pushed over from a searchable standpoint into sex toy.
Oh, okay.
So there was a guy who was doing what he called bad unboxings, parodying the genre, and was including children's cartoons while also popping out giant dildos and vibrators.
Yeah, that's not really kids' content.
No. And so the people who were making genuine kids' content of unpacking toys and playing with toys said, oh my gosh, this is appearing in our, suggested sidebar because of the metadata.
Yeah.
How do we get that voted down? And I thought, whoa, that's super interesting. Not only are all of you random suburbanites kind of like peppered across the country, you're talking together in a way that's off of YouTube and sharing in a really communitarian sort of way.
Like production tips. And
not only production tips, but like, I'm going to do this toy. Does anyone want to do a collaboration? Hey, I'm a super hardcore Barbie fan. Does anyone have a this or a that? Or I know that you're a super hardcore Thomas the Tank Engine channel. I'm going to send you all of my this or that's.
Wow.
Not only were they willing to share production practices, but they really formed a community. And when somebody's video got flagged or demonetized, or, there were collaborations to be done, they were doing them. And there were thousands of posts from hundreds of creators all chatting with each other.
Wow.
And
that's incredible. That's
how I know that initially I got dinged out from getting interviews, because they all put up on the group chat, hey, have you been messaged by this Jarrod Walczer guy? He wants to talk to us about some sort of research. And they're all like, yep, got the same email. Nope.
Yeah, okay.
Nope. We've been burned by journalists who say that we are just the nadir of consumer capitalism. We don't want that to happen again.
Gotcha.
Look at who he's worked with. He's worked with Common Sense Media. They probably don't like us very much.
Okay.
So it wasn't until I got the trust of Brian, Lori, and their sons Gabe and Garrett on the Gabe and Garrett channel, and Chris and Ashley of the Toy Bunker channel.
Links in the description. They're going to be popping up right below.
They will be.
That's awesome.
It wasn't until I got their trust and their willingness to talk to me that I had anything. So I came back to Stuart and David and said, whoa, this doesn't need a regulatory angle. These people are self-regulating. They're community regulating. They are fighting the platform. They are trying to make great stuff. And Stuart and David went, that's really cool. We're still going to write the paper the way we want to write it. It's like, oh, all right. I don't agree with that, but okay. Yeah, I'm just a contract researcher. And Stuart was kind enough. He said, the things you found are really interesting. I don't want to explore them myself, but your research is really good. You're obviously very smart. You should think about doing your PhD on the subject. And I went, yeah, okay.
Wow.
I said, well, I was being real cocky. He said, well, if you could pay me like they do in the US full, then I'd even come to wherever you are in Australia. Where's Brisbane? No one's heard of Brisbane. It's Sydney or Melbourne. And he laughed. He said, actually, David and I were going to suggest that you apply to QUT and you do your PhD with me.
Wow.
And I said, wait, I was just being a jerk. Are you serious? I said, yeah. So
that's awesome.
I had kind of gone down with this idea in mind. I had just started a brand new contract with the New York Times. And so I was literally 2 weeks into the job. I got my acceptance notice from QUT, and I waited and waited because I'm like, well, I can't afford more student debt. But I found out at the company Christmas party that I got the full scholarship. And so 3 months into my job at the Times, I quit and I moved down to Australia in February to then start studying these people who were called toy unboxers. And what I found through my work, and I've looked at, for this thesis, over 5,000 videos that have been coded. I've interviewed 25 of the top creators in the US, which represents 87 different channels. Many of them have more than one.
Wow.
I've looked at the YouTube platform and the YouTube Kids application, doing really deep, what we call application walkthroughs, talking about every facet of the platform and how they can help or inhibit the creation of toy content for children.
Yeah.
And then I've also done massive API scraping of YouTube itself to try and see how the YouTube algorithm maps different creators and types of videos together.
Oh, Lord. Wow.
What I have found through all of that different mixed methodology research is that the actual unboxing of the toy, which is what the press fixates on, is a super duper small part of this.
Wow.
Like, it was really big in 2010 when you could put up a 30-second video and that was cool on YouTube and kids would watch it again and again and again. But by the time that the popular press started actually writing about this stuff in 2013, that convention was dead. It was such a small part. They were already starting to go into really interesting niche genre conventions with some of this stuff that made me think like, wow, the popular press is looking at this through such a myopic lens.
Yeah.
And lobbyists and watchdog groups like the Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood down in DC were already starting to say like, I don't like this. It makes me uncomfortable what these quote unquote toy unboxers were doing. And so I kind of fell very quickly into an activist stance in my research, which said like, listen, the people that I'm talking to and that are willing to talk to me are suburbanites like you and me who stumbled onto this thing and are now really trying to provide a moral intelligence and an ethics of care to their community of creators, as I had said earlier, as well as their audience. And they are making stuff that little kids like my niece and nephew want to watch.
Yeah.
They are playing with toys in naked light, pulling them out of the box, reviewing them, and have no qualms mashing Batman with Spider-Man with Barbie, even though they all come from different toy companies and cinematic universes, just in the way that a child would play with them, with their toys themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. So it emulates the play that a child would actually go through.
Absolutely.
And you were mentioning like a lot of these people, a lot of the creators, they're parents themselves. So they have kids. Like a lot of them were doing this for the value of their children.
Yeah.
And having that direct relationship with the audience, basically.
Absolutely. So there are a couple of things here, which is that a lot of the people who I interviewed got started really early on because they were themselves were hardcore adult toy collectors. And I don't mean like adult toys. I mean, they were adults who collected toys that would have been popular during their childhood. Barbies, Hot Wheels, baseball cards. Just clarifying. Or they were people that put up home movies of playing in the backyard or Christmas morning, unwrapping of gifts. And
that Nintendo video, the kid unwrapping the Nintendo back in, like, it's a home video, but I mean, that must have seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of plays. Mm-hmm. And it's literally just a kid opening up a box and going, Super Nintendo!
Yeah. So the fact that then little kids wanted to watch this, and that they would come back again and again to a family's Christmas morning where a Tickle Me Elmo got unwrapped or a Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
The people that got into this marketplace early on then started to actually create the genre conventions that became the genre of kids content. Okay. They started to go and film in Toys R Us and go toy hunting, as Melissa Hunter and her daughter Gracie on the Mommy and Gracie show would do.
Okay.
They would go and hunt for a collectible doll that was really hard to find.
Gotcha, yeah.
You know, there were certainly people that would do mass unboxings and it would just be cracking open LOL doll after LOL doll after Kinder Egg after Kinder Egg. But I found that many of these creators then started to actually create their own niches based on their interest or their children's interests.
Okay.
And so your channel might be called Toys Unlimited. Shout out to Nat, Essie, and Sprinkles the Bear.
Nice.
But on Toys Unlimited, the things that children would expect for you to open and play with and make stories about would be Peppa Pig toys, Paw Patrol toys,
Gotcha.
any of the big branded keywords, as well as things like kitchen play sets, bath paints, colored Play-Doh lids. And so all of these weird little tips and tricks that a mom or a dad might use to engage a child in the kitchen or in the bathroom or to help to get over some of those difficult things of parenting a young child are now being incorporated into the content and turned into actual full genre conventions that the children's media industry, as it exists in a broadcast sense or even in an SVOD and OTT stance, doesn't really exist. It doesn't follow the same narrative format.
Right, yeah.
And I think the cool part about this is, yes, many of these people had children. They kept their children off camera in a lot of cases because they wanted to protect their identity. They kept their own faces off camera and operated just as a disembodied pair of hands opening and playing and being the voice in the back of your head.
Yeah.
Because they are private citizens who were former nurses and engineers and a Starbucks barista who stumbled onto YouTube and found out, holy crap, I can make more money staying at home playing with toys with my kids than I can at my 9 to 5.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And when okay, the Starbucks barista, that makes sense. But when you're a former trauma nurse, when you're a former engineer, when you're a former investment banker,
Yeah.
and those salaries are markedly larger in varying proportions to the
Jeez.
Starbucks barista.
Yeah.
When you're turning millions of dollars a year
Mm-hmm.
for opening toys and playing with them with your children or for children on the internet, like who wouldn't want to do that? Who doesn't want to sit and play?
Exactly. Yeah. It's such a value proposition to their family too. Like even beyond just like the monetary proposition that they get from that, it becomes like, okay, now you're going to get paid to be a parent, like with your kids, be present with them, which is hugely valuable to that family in and of itself.
Absolutely.
But then also, like, I feel like the channel benefits from that. Like the content that they're creating, it becomes more family centric and follows that line and becomes quality family content because of that.
Well, of course. I mean, so many of the creators that I've interviewed said you have no idea what it's like to be able to work from home, doing something that you and your children love. You get family time. And I think the big takeaway here is that for most of the big creators, not all, but most,
Yeah.
they had zero media training. They didn't go to Full
Wow.
Sail or to Ithaca.
Yeah.
They didn't know Avid or Final Cut. They literally watched YouTube videos to figure out how to edit YouTube videos, knowing that their
Right.
first 5, 10, 100 videos sucked. But
Yeah.
because the taste culture of little children is so radically different from adults because they're not socialized to saying, Game of Thrones is fine cinema, but, I'm not really a fan of The Wire. Because kids don't have that, so many children were super content watching a mom with a thick Chinese accent cracking open a Kinder Egg on her iPhone 6 with no lighting, no nice MXL microphones.
Yeah.
And that video could generate thousands of dollars a day
Yeah.
and have it be fairly minimal effort. So then over time, these people who stumbled across this thing became self-taught learners as they professionalized, monetized, and fought to algorithmically privilege their content and become the tastemakers of not only kids YouTube, but YouTube writ large.
Yeah.
Some of the people, I mean, the top ranking YouTuber right now in terms of take-home pay
Mhm.
is a little boy by the name of Ryan. He's 7 years old. He brought home, I think, $26 million last year.
I heard about that.
More
yeah.
than PewDiePie, more than Justin Bieber.
That's
more,
incredible.
and while he's the big honcho, there are people who occupy a space, let's say a rung below that are or were bringing in millions of dollars a year doing similar types of content.
Yeah. Okay.
In fairness, I didn't speak to Ryan and his family, and I think there's good reason for that. But, I look at what many of the people that I interviewed in this space have told me, and I say that there's something really important about this type of content. And for as much as it is lambasted by activist groups saying that, we should campaign for a commercial-free childhood,
Right.
or for as many critics might say that this is unfair targeting or advertising to children, and there's merit in those arguments, I also see where that is not largely the intention of the people that I have interviewed and worked with, and that the people that I have interviewed and worked with developed a personal practice and an ethics of care where they figured out that by chance and then hard work that they were creating content that rivaled Mickey Mouse and SpongeBob SquarePants for the attention economy of young people, and they took their role very seriously.
Yeah.
So the fact that now the federal government, through the FTC and YouTube as a corporation, have really forced that portion of children's content out by changing the algorithm, by putting in new filtering metrics, by really heavily monitoring certain keywords to keep out the baddies, you have actually also, while keeping children away from things that are violent or sexual or questionable in nature, you have actually also hidden a very important portion of children's content that I have to think that my niece and nephew Jordan and Jade will become nostalgic for and will look for, and yet will not exist. There will be no VHS tapes to go and rummage through because
Right.
these are on private servers from people's private homes. And
Yeah.
those who can no longer make money on YouTube will be forced to either do it as a passion or have to go back to work. And so
Yeah.
it won't be the same if it's at all.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's a very like it's a changing sphere of production, first of all, and analytics. Like figuring out which analytics are actually like pertinent to the material, and then also when it comes to delivering the content. So
Yes.
the ways that you share it online and all that stuff. This is such a broad topic, and yet there's so much detail along the way. Like it's incredible to see the genesis of this, especially in your career too, because I'm seeing it through the lens of someone who's known you for a while.
Right.
And hearing this whole story, it makes so much sense. Just going back to like where we started, where it's like, oh, this is like what you learn to do with your brother.
Yep.
You figured out, okay, you're getting feedback from him. That's your research.
Yep.
You're seeing, okay, he'll react in this way, and this means that. You're learning the translation, and then you're finding your own ways to produce content like that for him.
Yep.
And then seeing like how the delivery method affects that.
Yeah. Yeah, precisely. And I think that's maybe a good point to add that, look, my doctoral thesis, the research is done. It's going to be another couple of months, and they will give me the funny hat and they'll call me doctor.
Yeah.
And so for those of you who are really interested in this topic, we'll probably do a follow-up about the thesis itself. I'll give you the 45-minute spiel. But what you said is, I got started in this business thinking about producing content verbally and in a vernacular way for my brother so that he could engage with his world. And now, this past year, I have just formed a company with two really wonderful YouTubers, the folks over at the Toys Unlimited channel, Nat, Essie, and Sprinkles the Bear, and then my friends over at either Fizzy Fun Toys or Fizzy Toy Show. So Miss Hands and Fizzy Phoebe and my friend the Wizard Lizard.
Cool.
We are now working to take what have been some of the most successful intellectual properties and pieces of children's culture in the 20 teens.
Yeah.
Man, can we say the 20 teens, right?
Oh,
We're in the roaring 20s.
the 20 teens.
Yes, the twin teens. We have basically joined forces to try and combat what are the structural issues with YouTube changing.
Yeah.
The fact that kids content really can't be on YouTube anymore.
Yeah, it can't be like monetized and advertised in that way.
So we are looking to basically blend their wonderful senses of play and their characters together with my own crazy research brain and my own character-driven brain, as I said earlier, to try and basically push this idea that the kind of play and play with toys as they have done so effectively and has been demonstrated as being successful on YouTube is of incredible importance to children. And so,
absolutely.
So while we're under really strict NDA and I can't tell you any more than that, what I can say is that we are working to develop something between the three of us, I should say the four of us, that I think will really impress some of your audience here, and I hope will become of importance and of value to the generation of kids that are losing many of their beloved friends on YouTube in a way that will still maintain that really wonderful YouTube-y sense of what makes YouTube, while also putting it in a paradigm where it is certainly a profitable venture, because I have student loans if any of you want to pay those, and also making sure that it is something that parents trust, that networks trust, that YouTube trusts, and that more importantly than anything else, that kids trust and want to have a part of their lives.
Yeah, it's got the seal of approval on all ends of the spectrum, both from children and from producers and platforms.
And moms and dads.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm so excited to talk about like the rest of this and where your PhD goes and all that stuff. It's been a massive pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, listen, dude, anytime. And wow, I can't wait for us to be able to do this again sometime soon.
Yeah, we got to do some of those reaction videos too, because now I'm just thinking about watching those old cartoons back in the day, like All That and whatnot. It's, geez.
Listen, you want to watch it with us.
Oh yeah, that'll be good. Jarrod, thank you so much. Jarrod Walczer, everybody. As always, thank you for watching another episode of the FCMG Podcast. You can find all those links down in the description, and we'll end off with how can people find you? Like if you have like a social media or anything like that you would want like people to bring questions to you or ideas or any of that stuff.
Sure. So for professional inquiries, you can find me on LinkedIn. I have a funny spelled first name, Jarrod, and a really ugly surname, Walc as in cat, Z as in zebra, E as in elephant, R. You can find me on LinkedIn, send me a direct message, and I'm happy to offer my professional YouTube consulting services, academic services, or we can just shoot the shit about kids content. And then if you want to follow me on social, you can find me at Jarrod Walczer on Instagram.
Awesome. Check out those links. And as always, thank you and peace.